In this video, we're talking about Xbox's first huge victory, the out-of-control remaster situation at PlayStation, and why we might be waiting a long time for new PS5 games.
Snake, are you okay? Snake?
How's it going, everyone? Welcome to PSReady. This is my news update here on the channel. Before I jump into the news, I gotta tell you, Alan Wake 2 is not a game to be slept on. I bought a copy of it, full price. I was ready to play it. It is absolutely phenomenal. It's a survival horror game this time around. It's less action heavy than the original Alan Wake. And the one thing that I really wasn't super stoked to do is switch between Alan and Saga. I was dead wrong there. It is cool playing as Saga. It's cool playing as Alan. It's technically like playing two games because Alan's entire story pretty much takes place in the Dark Place, which is like a screwed up version of New York City. And then you've got Bright Falls, completely rebuilt, but they kept everything pretty much the same layout wise, but it looks so awesome just to explore that little town. And then you also get to explore Watery and Coffee World and everything. The combat is directly ripped from Resident Evil 2 and 4 remake. The only thing that was screwing me up is when you're playing as Saga, there's these like bright hearts in the villains that you're shooting and you have to body shot them, whereas in Resident Evil I'm just doing headshots all over the place. Or in Resident Evil 4 I shoot them in the legs and then I suplex them just to get the quicker kill there. It was a little bit of a learning curve, but once I got it, it was really cool. It's way scarier than the original Alan Wake, and it's a $60 game on console, so you're saving $10 on arguably one of the greatest looking games of all time. And the performance mode shockingly mostly runs at 60 FPS. There are definitely some times when it drops below 60, but overall it is a great experience on the PlayStation 5. I cannot recommend it enough. The first news story I have for you guys today is one that, once again, it's just like annoying to keep seeing these Xbox controversies keep bubbling up to the surface and be spread around for an entire weekend. Only when you read the story do you realize how many technicalities there are to get to this point. But all weekend, the big news story going around was that for the first time ever, Xbox is poised to bump PlayStation down to third place. Now, that sounds crazy and totally out of the realm of possibility based on the numbers we have, like the PS5 is outselling the PS4 and the Xbox Series X and S are underselling compared to the Xbox One. So you sit there and you're like, how could Xbox possibly beat Sony in total revenue, right? And it turns out it's because hypothetically, if you take the revenue that Activision is going to earn this quarter and combine it with the revenue Xbox has earned through things like game sales and Xbox Game Pass and of course console sales, then technically they have more revenue than PlayStation, which like I don't even know if that's something worth celebrating on the Xbox side of the fence. Who cares if Xbox makes more money? That doesn't ultimately result in better games, and has not this entire generation, I will remind you, resulted in better games. And also, it's not even like a real thing. It's a hypothetical thing that says probably the money is not going to be counted towards Xbox's revenue. So in reality, this whole thing that people are talking about didn't even really happen. I'm just getting so sick of the engagement bait that the console war has become. You know, it used to be kind of fun to have fandom around PlayStation or Xbox. You could have friendly arguments with your friends, especially back when I was in like middle and high school and the Xbox 360 was the hot thing. On PS3, I had games like Uncharted 2, Uncharted 1, Resistance 2, Little Big Planet 2, Infamous 1 and 2. There were tons and tons of great first party games there that I was enjoying. Of course, Metal Gear Solid 4 was on that list, but over on Xbox, you also had big tentpole blockbuster games that you could get excited about, like Halo 3, Halo Reach, Gears 2, Gears 3. The Forza games were also awesome back then. The list goes on and on with the Xbox 360 as well. So if you're with your friends, you could sit there and say like, oh, I really like Gears or I really like Infamous, and you could talk about the differences between those games and why you might like them. Now, we have to argue over things like, well, technically, Xbox bought Activision and Activision made this much revenue in this quarter, so you know they actually did get more revenue than Sony, and Sony's in third place. It's like, okay, cool, that's not a game. That's not something fun to talk about for me that like I'm going to go talk about with my friends at the end of the day, or now at the bar after work or something like that. At the end of the day, what I want to talk about is what my friends think about Spider-Man 2's story, right? Whereas now it seems like on Twitter, where I used to go to talk about video games with friends and stuff like that, you can't even bring anything up without it turning into a console war argument where people are talking about revenue that $1 billion company made. Like, at the end of the day, who cares? And what does that really say about Xbox and Microsoft, right? Like, you're looking at this and you're saying, oh, the way that they got to this revenue high point is by buying Activision and getting games like Call of Duty, the biggest game ever, the only thing that has a chance at usurping Hogwarts Legacy as the greatest selling game of this year. Microsoft had to buy them to get to the point where they're technically making more money than Sony, but they're not really, because they still have to recoup all of that money they spent on Activision in the first place. So until they make $69 billion or whatever, it's just going towards interest and principal on their purchase of Activision Blizzard. Really, I would love to get to the point where Microsoft is making great games that actually compete with Sony, and I feel like they're right there. I've been playing a ton of Season 5 of Halo Infinite. It sucks that it took, what, like 3 years or so, or 2 years for that game to actually get to a point where it feels like a full-fledged premium product. And even then, you're still paying a little bit of a tax because the multiplayer, remember, was free to play, so they can charge $22, $24 for skins and everything like that, and introduce multiple battle passes with paid tiers into this game that's a premium product at the end of the day. I don't think you really see that often from Sony, but like, correct me if I'm wrong. But still, Halo is really good. They won Game of the year Forza Horizon 5 came out. I think people really generally liked Forza Motorsport. It died out really quick online, but so did Gran Turismo 7, and I feel like the fan bases of those games play them quietly. And also, there's games like Hellblade 2 coming next year and tons of other stuff that Xbox has ready to go, but they're also dealing with the fact that none of their stuff was nominated for the Game Awards, Starfield included. They're still in a little bit of a messy spot. I feel like they can recover, but I just feel like writing up a tweet that's like, Xbox technically made more money than Sony this time, and it wasn't by making awesome games, it was by buying the studio. I'd feel a little weird hitting the send tweet button on that one. And I've also seen this point being thrown around that Sony also bought their studios that they make great games with now. And yeah, for the most part that is true, but the one thing people leave out is that before these studios are purchased, Sony makes multiple games with them, and once they have enough amazing games under their belt, they've had Sony coaching them to the top, then Sony purchases the studio when they're arguably at their peak, which ironically is the worst time for Sony to buy them, right? Like Insomniac, Returnal, Sucker Punch, there are tons. I mean, even Naughty Dog is another studio that Sony purchased, right? But they didn't purchase a lot of these studios, or really the vast majority of them, until they'd already made great games with them. Whereas Microsoft hasn't made a single exclusive game with Activision, right? They never made Call of Duty exclusively with them. They've never coached them into making Call of Duty the behemoth it is. They literally looked at a spreadsheet and said, well, Activision makes the most money out of everyone in the industry with Call of Duty, so let's go buy them. So yeah, as far as the console war stuff goes, I think this is a stupid thing to get excited over. I think it's good for the Xbox brand as a whole that they're making this much money, because it means it'll stick around, which is a huge left turn reversal from where they were in the middle of last generation, which was thinking about shutting the Xbox brand down. That's great. It's just like, when it comes to the fanboy stuff, I keep it off Twitter. Talk to your friends about games you're playing, because you're going to get a much better conversation out of that than arguing with your friend over who's making more money. Next up here, though, is a situation where I do think it's fair to criticize Sony, and that, of course, is with the new remaster of The Last of Us Part 2. Now, I don't want to put any conspiracy theories out there, but this was 100% something that was going to be announced at the Game Awards. I was there last year when The Last of Us Part 1 and its PC port, I think it was actually just the PC port's release date, got announced, and it made sense that they would do that again because they've announced a ton of stuff at the Game Awards over at Naughty Dog. So of course they've done a full pass over the game and they've increased the graphics marginally. I honestly don't think you're going to notice the graphical change, especially considering they already did a patch on the PS5 that made it run at 60 FPS and target 4K better than it did on the PS4 and PS4 Pro, but thankfully there is new content. They have lost levels where you can play early in development cut levels, which is cool if you're into that sort of thing, but the thing that I'm very excited for is a new roguelite mode called No Return, where you're going to be able to play as characters that have never been seen before in the Last of Us franchise. And I'm just going to point out that the more time that goes on with The Last of Us, the more and more it just becomes Resident Evil, because when I hear roguelite mode where you play as side characters you've never heard of before, it's just like the Mercenaries start screen just grows in my head, which is great because The Last of Us Part 2 I think has combat very close to what you saw in Resident Evil 2 remake for sure, and especially when you're playing as Abby, it gets even closer to Resident Evil 4. So yeah, it is cool to know that we're gonna have a brand new roguelite mode. I don't know why they don't have multiplayer. I think there should be multiplayer in this. I'm sick of waiting for this game that may or may not ever come out, but you know, a roguelite mode is a cool inclusion, and all of this is just going to cost you $10 if you've already had the game on your account. I don't know what the situation is going to be with the disc version of The Last of Us Part 2, but if you have a digital version, I know that the upgrade is going to be $10. Now, the reason there's a controversy around this, is because it leaked before that $10 upgrade was even detailed, so people thought this was going to be a Last of Us Part 1 situation where you were going to pay close to full price for this remastered version of the game. And B, there are just so many remasters coming out of Naughty Dog, it's like hard to get excited about anything from them. They've had The Last of Us 1 remastered, they had The Last of Us Part 1 remake, now they have The Last of Us Part 2 with the 60 FPS patch, and now they're remastering it and making it a $10 upgrade just so you can have that PS5 version. And I'm like begrudgingly upset here because I'm like thinking about buying just a disc version because the box art matches up with The Last of Us Part 1's box art. It looks really cool, but it's a game I already own. So if I want that new box art, I've got to go pick up a full priced version of this game, which bums me out. Of course, there's no reason to get mad about a remaster of a game coming out so soon after it releases, but it's like, it seems like Naughty Dog is wasting resources on this stuff when all anyone wants from them is either a new game or The Last of Us Part 3, but because they want to tie everything into The Last of Us TV show and capitalize on the new audience, they of course have to have something ready that works on the PlayStation 5. And since the audience for The Last of Us TV show was so casual, they want to make sure they have a PS5 box ready to go, so no one goes to the store and says, well, I have a PS5 and all that's available is the PS4 version of The Last of Us Part 2. So yeah, well, I think the controversy was a little overblown on this one because ultimately it's a $10 upgrade for a game that, like, if you're a PlayStation fan, you probably already own. I think it is getting a little ridiculous how many remakes and remasters Sony puts out. It's not nearly as bad as the PS3 generation when we were getting like the Ico and Shadow of the Colossus collection, the God of War collection, then we got another God of War HD collection that also included the PSP games upscaled for the PS3. We got the Jack collection, the Ratchet collection, like there were collections coming out all the time in the PS3 generation, and then the PS4 kind of toned it down a bit. I don't think it's that bad, but it is getting a little tiresome only having remakes and remasters coming out from PlayStation, it seems like. The third thing I want to talk about today is the release date of Wolverine. Of course, a lot of people were assuming after Spider-Man 2 came out, and it doesn't seem like we're going to get much DLC for Spider-Man 2, that maybe we could expect Wolverine in 2024 because Insomniac is usually really good at getting games out the door, but unfortunately, due to a leak from Insider Gaming, it looks like this game is not coming out before 2025. Like it's going to be 2025 or even later before we see Wolverine. The cool thing is that it's going to take place in Madripoor, which showed up, I think, in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, but it's like a haven for pirates. I was hoping it would kind of be like Logan, where it's like a US based road trip style game, but the fact that we're also hearing it's going to be more violent is very cool. I'm just getting a little bit worried about next year, right? Like this reminds me of the beginning of the PS4 generation when we had no idea what games to expect. We got Infamous Second Son. It was like a high 7s, low 8s type of game. People blew through it in a weekend, and then we all sat there wondering like what is coming out on the PlayStation 4. Now eventually, I think it was the year after, Sony did a great E3 showcase where they let us know about games like Days Gone, Horizon Zero Dawn. I always mix up the titles for that. Horizon Zero Dawn, Spider-Man, there were a ton of other games that were announced at that time, and we are all sitting here right now kind of feeling the same way, right? Like Final Fantasy 16 is out the gates. Of course, we have Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth coming next year, but beyond that, the biggest Sony game it looks like we have to look forward to in 2024 is Helldivers 2, which like I'm not shitting on Helldivers 2. I'm very excited for that game. We just need to know what we have to look forward to that's on the scale of Spider-Man 2, right? Like there are tons of PlayStation studios working on games right now that we have no idea what they're working on. People like Sucker Punch, Naughty Dog, Ben Studio, all of these studios are making big AAA first party games, but we don't know what they are or even have a concept of it. Now, thankfully, it seems like games like Concord or Fair Games, the multiplayer live service stuff that Sony's been developing for a little bit, those are going to come out next year, but we don't know anything about what those games actually are, which is frustrating. And luckily for Sony, it seems like people just genuinely don't really care about this. The PS5, as I mentioned earlier in the video, is outselling the PS4 by a pretty wide margin. And for For the vast majority of this generation, every game that was on PS5 was also available on PS4, but we're finally getting to a point where people are just happy to go buy the PS5, play their backlog, and also work on games like Spider-Man 2, which a big milestone was hit with Spider-Man 2. I think it's like the 4th best-selling game of the year. We're approaching the attach rate with this game that we used to have in like the PS3 and 360 generation, so things are obviously looking up for Sony. It's just getting a little bit worrisome that we have one of the biggest and best years for gaming ever, and then following it up, we have a year where we don't know anything that's coming out from Sony specifically. Anyway, guys, that's all I've got for you today. Make sure you let me know what you think down in the comments below, and remember to subscribe and set your notifications to all if you haven't already. As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching, and shape on.